the cemetery lay silent, a vast landscape of marble and memories, interrupted only by the soft rustling of autumn leaves. Thomas walked slowly between the rows of headstones, his steps heavy with grief, each footfall a painful reminder of his loss. 1 month had passed since Emily's funeral, yet the wound of her absence remained as raw and unbearable as the day of the accident. He carried a small bouquet of white lilies, Emily's favorite. The delicate flowers trembled slightly in his unsteady grip, a physical manifestation of the emotional tremors that continued to rack his body. They had been so happy, so full of hope. Just 8 months ago, Emily had been pregnant, her belly swollen with their first child, their dreams of parenthood stretching out before them like an endless, sunlit horizon. The memory of their last conversation played in his mind like a bittersweet film. Emily had been sorting through baby clothes, her eyes sparkling with excitement, discussing potential names and painting elaborate plans for their future. Thomas remembered how she had looked that day, radiant, full of life, her auburn hair catching the morning light, her hands gently caressing her growing belly. And then, in an instant, everything had been destroyed. The car accident had been sudden and brutal. A truck, witnesses said, had run a red light. The collision was so severe that the police initially believed no one could have survived. Thomas had identified what remained of the vehicle, his world collapsing around him as he recognized the distinctive blue paint of their family car. Now, standing before Emily's grave, Thomas felt the weight of his grief like a physical burden. The polished granite headstone reflected the weak autumn sunlight. Emily's name etched in elegant script, a permanent memorial to a life cut tragically short. As he knelt to place the lilies at the base of the headstone, a movement in his peripheral vision caught his attention. A silhouette, barely perceptible, stood at a distance, partially obscured by a large oak tree, but distinctly human in shape. Something about the figure seemed hauntingly familiar. Thomas blinked, wondering if his grief-stricken mind was playing tricks on him. Grief did strange things to a person's perception, he knew. Mourning created mirages, phantoms of hope and memory that danced at the edges of reality. The silhouette remained motionless. For a moment, Thomas was certain it looked like Emily. The posture, the way the figure seemed to be turned slightly towards him. But that was impossible. Emily was gone. The accident, the funeral, the devastating loss, all of it was painfully, irrevocably real. He stood, his legs slightly unsteady, and turned to look directly at the spot where the figure had stood. Nothing. Just the gentle sway of autumn branches and the melancholic landscape of the cemetery. "Emily," he whispered, more to himself than to any potential presence. The name felt both familiar and strange on his lips. A prayer, a memory, a desperate invocation. The wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of fallen leaves and distant rain. Thomas pulled his jacket closer, suddenly feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Something about that momentary vision unsettled him. A feeling that something was not quite right, that the story of his loss was far from complete. He took one last look at Emily's grave, his fingers tracing the engraved letters of her name. The white lilies seemed to glow softly against the dark granite, a stark contrast of life against the stillness of the memorial. As he turned to leave, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The mysterious silhouette, though now gone, had planted a seed of doubt in his grieving mind. A tiny, almost imperceptible crack in the narrative of loss he had accepted. Little did he know, that moment would be the first step in a journey that would unravel everything he thought he knew about Emily's death and her life. Thomas decides to print a photo of Emily to place on her grave. The photography shop's fluorescent lights cast a sterile glow over rows of digital printing stations. Thomas stood, his fingers tracing the edges of a printed photograph, a snapshot from their last vacation to the Mediterranean coast. Emily's smile radiated the kind of joy that now seemed like a distant memory, a ghostly reminder of what he had lost. He remembered that day vividly. The azure waters of Greece stretched behind them, Emily's sundress billowing in the gentle breeze, her hand resting softly on her then-growing pregnancy. They had been discussing baby names, dreaming of their future. Now, those dreams lay shattered like fragmented glass, each memory a sharp-edged remnant of a life brutally interrupted. The silhouette he'd seen at the cemetery continued to haunt him. Was it a trick of grief? A manifestation of his desperate desire to see Emily again? Or something more? Thomas couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that something was fundamentally wrong with the narrative of her death. As he waited for the final prints, a movement caught his peripheral vision. A woman entered the shop, her gait and silhouette momentarily causing his heart to stop. For a breathless moment, Thomas was certain it was Emily. She moved with a similar grace, her hair styled in a way that echoed Emily's preferred look. The world seemed to slow, his breath catching in his throat. But then she turned, and the illusion shattered. Her eyes, a deep brown instead of Emily's distinctive green, brought him crashing back to reality. The shop attendant's voice broke through his reverie. "Sir, your prints are ready." Thomas collected the photographs, his hands trembling slightly. The images captured Emily in moments of pure, unbridled happiness, laughing on the beach, sleeping peacefully, her pregnant belly a testament to the life they had planned together. Each photograph was a portal to a past that now felt unreal. The woman in these images seemed almost like a stranger, someone from a life he could no longer access. The vibrant colors and joyful expressions stood in stark contrast to the gray landscape of grief he now inhabited. Walking out of the shop, Thomas felt the weight of the photographs like a physical burden. The bright Mediterranean scenes seemed to mock his current reality. A world without Emily, a world of unanswered questions and overwhelming loss. The mysterious silhouette from the cemetery lingered in his mind. Something about that brief, fleeting image refused to be dismissed as mere grief-induced hallucination. It was too precise, too deliberate to be a mere trick of light and shadow. As he drove home, the photographs spread beside him on the passenger seat. Thomas couldn't escape the growing suspicion that something was fundamentally wrong with the story of Emily's death. The silhouette, the unexplained sense of something amiss, these were not mere products of grief, but fragments of a larger, more complex narrative waiting to be unraveled. The day's events left him with a mixture of nostalgia and confusion. The photographs of Emily seemed both a comfort and a torment, preserving her memory while simultaneously highlighting the enormous void her absence had created. As the afternoon light began to fade, Thomas arrived home, carrying not just printed memories, but the first subtle threads of a mystery that was about to unravel in ways he could never have anticipated. The cemetery's early morning silence enveloped Thomas like a heavy shroud. The familiar path to Emily's grave had become a pilgrimage of grief, each step a reminder of his profound loss. 3 days had passed since his last visit, but the ache remained as raw as the day of her funeral. As he approached the grave, something seemed different. A small bundle lay nestled against the marble headstone, incongruous against the carefully manicured grass. Thomas froze, his heart racing. At first, he thought it might be a discarded package, a piece of trash carelessly left behind. But as he drew closer, the bundle moved. A baby, wrapped in a soft, cream-colored blanket with delicate blue embroidery along the edges. Thomas's breath caught in his throat. The infant's face was partially hidden, but something about the delicate features struck him with an inexplicable familiarity. The baby's skin was pale, with a hint of rosiness that reminded him so much of Emily. He knelt down, careful not to startle the child. The baby was clean, well cared for, clearly not abandoned carelessly. A small identification tag was partially tucked into the blanket, but Thomas couldn't bring himself to look at it immediately. His hands trembled as he reached out, instinctively checking if the infant was warm, safe. The baby's eyes, a startling shade of blue-green, met his. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Those eyes held a depth that seemed impossible for such a young child. They were eyes that spoke of secrets, of something more profound than mere coincidence. "Hello," Thomas whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "Who are you?" Logically, he knew he should call the authorities. A lone infant at a gravesite was clearly not normal. Every rational thought suggested he dial the police, report the found child. His finger hovered over his phone's screen, thumb ready to dial. But something stopped him. A memory flickered. Emily's laugh, her promise during their last conversation about their unborn child. "We'll protect our family, no matter what," she had said. The words echoed in his mind with sudden, sharp clarity. He canceled the call. The baby remained quiet, watching him with an unsettling intensity. No crying, no fussing, just those eyes that seemed to hold an entire universe of unspoken stories. Thomas carefully lifted the infant, cradling the small body against his chest. The blanket was of high quality, clearly expensive. No ordinary abandoned child would be wrapped in such fine material. Something about this felt deliberate, planned. As he held the baby, he noticed a slight movement in the blanket. A folded piece of paper was tucked into its folds. Not yet, he told himself. First, he needed to ensure the child's immediate safety. The drive home was surreal. The baby sat quietly in the car seat he kept from their original preparations for their own child. Each stoplight, each turn, felt like a moment suspended between reality and something entirely unknown. His home, once a shrine to his grief, now felt different, alive. The baby's presence changed everything. Sunlight streamed through windows that had been perpetually drawn, casting warm patterns across the living room floor. Thomas knew he needed counsel, not from authorities who might complicate things, but from those who knew Emily best. Alex and Claire, Emily's closest friends, would understand. They would help him make sense of this impossible moment. As he prepared a bottle, muscle memory from their original preparations kicking in, Thomas realized his world had irrevocably changed. The baby watched him, those extraordinary eyes never leaving his face. "We're going to figure this out," he murmured, more to himself than to the child. "Whatever this means, we'll understand." Something profound was happening, and this child was at the center of it all. Next day, the soft morning light filtered through the curtains, casting a gentle glow on the infant sleeping peacefully in the makeshift crib Thomas had hastily assembled. He sat nearby, his eyes tracing the delicate features of the baby. Those striking blue-green eyes so reminiscent of Emily that they made his heart ache. As he adjusted the cream-colored blanket, his fingers brushed against something stiff and folded. Frowning, Thomas carefully extracted a small, carefully folded piece of paper, tucked deep within the blanket's seam. His hands trembled slightly as he unfolded the note, recognizing immediately the distinctive script he'd know anywhere. Emily's handwriting. The words seemed to dance before his eyes. My darling Thomas, if you're reading this, know that everything I've done is to protect our child and you. Argotech cannot be allowed to succeed. I am alive, but I cannot return yet. Trust no one completely, except those closest to our heart. The baby is safe with you, our son. Keep him safe. I will find my way back. All my love, Emily. Thomas read the note 3 times, each reading sending a fresh wave of shock through his body. The paper crinkled between his fingers as the implications crashed over him like a tsunami. Emily? Alive? The very thought seemed impossible, a cruel trick of grief and desperate hope. How could she have survived the car accident that had been so definitively reported? The medical records, the funeral, the death certificate, all of it suggested absolute certainty of her death. And yet, here was a note in her unmistakable handwriting, suggesting otherwise. The baby stirred, a small whimper breaking through Thomas's racing thoughts. He looked down, suddenly hyper-aware of the child's presence. Their son, Emily had written. Not just a random infant left at a grave, but their child, somehow saved, somehow protected. Argotech cannot be allowed to succeed, he murmured, repeating the cryptic line. The name triggered a distant memory, something Emily had mentioned months ago about suspicious activities at her workplace. A conversation cut short, a worried look she'd quickly masked. Thomas's investigative mind, dormant since Emily's supposed death, began to spark back to life. The note was deliberate, carefully hidden. Emily wanted him to find it, to understand. She wanted him to act. The mysterious silhouette he'd seen at the cemetery weeks ago suddenly took on new meaning. Was it Emily? Had she been watching, ensuring her plan worked perfectly? The thought both thrilled and terrified him. He realized he was holding multiple impossible truths simultaneously. Emily might be alive. Their child had been deliberately left for him to find. Something at Argotech was seriously wrong. The baby, their son, watched him with those familiar eyes, seemingly understanding the weight of the moment. Thomas gently ran a finger along the infant's cheek, a surge of protective instinct overwhelming him. "What happened to your mother?" he whispered. "And what are we going to do now?" The note offered no further explanations, but it was a beginning, a thread he knew he would follow relentlessly. Emily had always been brilliant, strategic. If she said she was alive and wanted protection for their child, something monumental was at stake. Thomas carefully folded the note and tucked it into his wallet. He would need to be careful, methodical. Emily's warning about trusting no one rang clearly in his mind. Something told him that discovering the truth would be far more dangerous than he could currently imagine. As if sensing the gravity of the moment, the baby let out a soft coo, drawing Thomas's attention back to the present. Their journey, whatever it might entail, was just beginning. The baby slept peacefully in a nearby bassinet, his rhythmic breathing a counterpoint to Thomas's intense concentration. His hands moved methodically, sifting through layers of paper and photographs. Each item was a fragment of a puzzle he was desperate to solve. Ticket stubs from their first date, concert programs, birthday cards, each memory now viewed through a lens of suspicion and uncertainty. A photograph suddenly caught his eye. Unlike the others, this one was different. Tucked beneath a stack of wedding photographs, it showed Emily standing next to a tall, professional-looking man. They were outside what appeared to be an office building. Emily dressed in her work attire, a crisp navy blazer and white blouse. The man beside her was unfamiliar, dressed in an expensive suit, his posture suggesting a level of professional intimacy. The photograph was dated just weeks before her supposed death. Thomas turned it over, hoping for some inscription that might provide context. Nothing. Just the blank white back of the photo, offering no explanation. "Who are you?" Thomas whispered, studying the unknown man's face. There was something calculated in his stance, something that didn't sit right with Thomas. The man's hand was positioned near Emily's shoulder, not quite touching, but close enough to suggest a familiarity that made Thomas uncomfortable. The baby stirred, a soft whimper breaking Thomas's concentration. He walked over, gently rocking the bassinet. Those striking blue-green eyes, so like Emily's, stared up at him. How was this child even possible? If Emily had died in that car accident, how could she have given birth? Doubt began to creep into his consciousness. Could Emily have been hiding something from him? The note she'd left suggested she was alive, that she had been protecting their child. But from what? From whom? He returned to the photograph, his mind racing. The unfamiliar man represented a part of Emily's life he knew nothing about. Her work at Argotech Solutions had always been something she kept somewhat private, citing confidentiality agreements and the sensitive nature of her technical role. Thomas remembered how Emily would sometimes come home late, her eyes tired, but her mind clearly preoccupied. She'd deflect questions about her day and change the subject. At the time, he'd assumed it was just work stress. Now, those memories felt like carefully constructed distractions. The baby's eyes remained fixed on him, almost as if sharing a secret. Thomas felt a strange connection, not just as a father, but as someone who was being gradually initiated into a mystery far more complex than he'd initially believed. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through recent text conversations with Alex and Claire. Emily's closest friends might have insights into this mysterious photograph and the man within it. Something told him they knew more than they'd initially revealed. The photograph seemed to pulse with unspoken secrets. Each time Thomas looked at it, new questions emerged. The man's professional attire suggested he was more than just a casual colleague. His proximity to Emily, the calculated pose, it all screamed of a relationship more nuanced than a simple professional interaction. As afternoon light transformed into early evening, Thomas realized his investigation was just beginning. The baby continued to sleep, blissfully unaware of the storm of questions surrounding his existence. Something was hidden here, in these photographs, in Emily's past, in the very fabric of her life before her supposed death. And Thomas was determined to uncover every single detail, no matter the cost. He placed the photograph carefully into a folder, his mind already planning his next move. He would speak to Alex and Claire. They had been Emily's closest friends, her confidants. Surely they would help him understand the growing web of mysteries surrounding his wife's life and apparent death. The silhouette he'd seen at the cemetery weeks ago seemed to flicker in his memory. Was it a grief-induced hallucination, or something more? Each passing moment added another layer to a story that was becoming increasingly complex. Thomas looked at the baby, then back at the folder containing the mysterious photograph. "We're going to find out the truth," he whispered, a determination burning in his eyes. The late afternoon sunlight cast long shadows across the small cafe, where Thomas sat across from Alex and Claire. His hands wrapped around a cooling cup of coffee, fingers slightly trembling. a testament to the weight of the questions he was about to ask. The baby, now safely with his mother, was momentarily forgotten in the urgency of uncovering the truth about Emily. Alex and Claire exchanged a look, a silent communication born of years of friendship. They had known Emily since college, and Thomas could see the concern etching lines around their eyes. Claire's fingers absently twisted the handle of her teacup, while Alex sat more rigidly, his posture suggesting a mix of anticipation and apprehension. "I know this might sound impossible," Thomas began, his voice low and controlled, "but I found a baby at Emily's grave, and a note, in her handwriting, suggesting she might be alive." The silence that followed was electric. Claire's eyes widened, a sharp intake of breath escaping her lips. Alex leaned forward, his professional demeanor momentarily cracking. "Thomas," Claire said softly, "Emily was worried about something in the months before the accident. She became increasingly anxious about her work at Argotech Solutions." Alex nodded, picking up the thread. "She discovered something. Some kind of illegal transactions. Emily was always principled. If she found evidence of wrongdoing, she wouldn't just let it go." "What kind of transactions?" Thomas pressed, his grip tightening on the coffee cup. Claire hesitated, then spoke. "Data theft, corporate espionage. Emily mentioned she had been tracking financial irregularities. She believed Argotech was selling confidential information to competitors. But it was more than just corporate secrets. She thought lives might be at risk." The pieces were starting to connect. The mysterious photo Thomas had found, Emily's cryptic note, the staged accident. Everything pointed to something far more sinister than a simple workplace dispute. "She was gathering evidence," Alex added, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Documenting everything meticulously. Emily was always thorough, but she became scared, said she felt like she was being watched." Thomas leaned forward. "Did she ever mention being threatened?" Claire's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "She was protecting something, or someone. The last time we spoke, she was different, scared but determined. She kept saying, 'I have to keep them safe.'" The "them" hung in the air. Now Thomas understood. Emily had been protecting their unborn child, protecting him. "We tried to convince her to go to the authorities," Alex said, a note of guilt creeping into his voice. "But Emily was adamant. She said the corruption went too high up, that nobody could be trusted." Thomas's mind raced. The silhouette at the cemetery, the carefully placed baby, the note. Emily had orchestrated an elaborate plan. She had found a way to survive, to protect their child, to expose Argotech's crimes. "I need to know everything," Thomas said, his voice steady but intense. "Every detail Emily shared, no matter how small or insignificant it might seem." Claire reached across the table, placing her hand over Thomas's. "We'll tell you everything we know. Emily was more than a friend. She was family. And we'll do whatever it takes to help you find her." As the cafe's afternoon light began to fade, Thomas realized his journey was just beginning. Emily was alive. Their child was safe. And somewhere, Argotech was about to face the consequences of their actions. The truth was waiting to be uncovered, one carefully guarded secret at a time. Methodical and determined, Thomas sifted through Emily's personal belongings, each item a potential clue to the mystery surrounding her disappearance. His fingers traced the edges of old notebooks, photo albums, and miscellaneous papers, searching for anything that might reveal the truth. A loose floorboard beneath Emily's antique desk caught his attention. Thomas knelt, carefully prying it open with a letter opener. His breath caught as he discovered a hidden compartment, a secret space Emily had clearly intended to keep concealed. Nestled inside was a slim USB drive, its black surface unmarked and unremarkable. With trembling hands, Thomas inserted the drive into his laptop. The screen flickered to life, revealing a series of encrypted folders and documents. As he navigated through the files, a chill ran down his spine. Spreadsheets detailing financial transactions, internal memos, and what appeared to be confidential corporate communications began to paint a disturbing picture of Argotech solutions. A handwritten note, tucked among the digital files, stood out. Emily's familiar script jumped out at him. "They know I know. I must protect my family." The words were both a warning and a promise, written in the margin of a document showing complex financial transfers and what seemed to be evidence of corporate espionage. Thomas's mind raced. The documents suggested Argotech was involved in systematic data theft, illegal financial transactions, and potentially something far more sinister. Names of high-ranking executives were highlighted, with cryptic annotations in Emily's handwriting, notes that hinted at a broader conspiracy. He immediately called Alex, his voice tight with urgency. "I need you and Claire to come over. I've found something, evidence that might explain everything about Emily's disappearance." An hour later, Alex and Claire sat across from Thomas in his living room. The USB drive lay between them, a silent witness to the unfolding mystery. Alex, a tech-savvy professional with keen analytical skills, carefully examined the documents. "These are serious," Alex muttered, scrolling through the files. Emily was definitely onto something big at Argotech. These transactions show systematic data manipulation and financial fraud. Claire leaned closer, her face pale. This explains why she was so scared in the months before her supposed accident. She must have discovered something that made her a target. Thomas's protective instinct surged. "We need to take this to someone who can help, someone who can investigate without tipping off Argotech." "Simon Blake," Alex suggested immediately. "He's an investigative journalist who specializes in corporate crime. If anyone can help unravel this, it's him." As they discussed their next steps, Thomas noticed a black sedan parked across the street. Its tinted windows reflected nothing, but something about its presence felt deliberate. When he looked again moments later, the car remained in the same position. "We're being watched," Thomas said quietly, drawing Alex and Claire's attention to the window. Claire's hand instinctively touched Thomas's arm. "We need to be careful. If Emily's documents are as explosive as they seem, Argotech won't want this getting out." Thomas nodded, his resolve hardening. The baby, their son, slept peacefully in the next room, a reminder of everything at stake. Whatever Argotech had done, whatever they were hiding, he would uncover the truth. Thomas knew their journey was just beginning. The USB drive represented more than just information. It was a lifeline to understanding Emily's disappearance and protecting their family. Little did Thomas know, the shadows gathering outside were more than just a trick of the evening light. Argotech was watching, and they were preparing to make their move. The evening air hung heavy with an unsettling silence as Thomas pulled into his driveway. His mother had just taken care of his infant son, giving him a moment of temporary peace to continue his investigation. Little did he know that peace was about to be shattered. As he stepped through the front door, the first thing that struck him was the smell, a musty, disturbed scent that suggested someone had been where they shouldn't. The living room, typically meticulously organized, now looked like a hurricane had torn through it. Books lay scattered across the floor, cushions ripped open, their stuffing spilling out like wounded entrails. Thomas's heart raced. His hand instinctively reached for his phone, fingers trembling slightly as he surveyed the destruction. The bookshelves Emily had lovingly arranged were now a chaotic mess. Picture frames lay shattered, glass fragments reflecting the dim evening light like 1,000 accusing eyes. "What the hell?" he muttered, moving carefully through the room. The kitchen was no better. Drawers hung open, their contents dumped unceremoniously on the floor. Plates and glasses were smashed, creating a treacherous landscape of ceramic shards. Yet, amid the chaos, one thing remained conspicuously untouched: the USB drive Thomas had discovered in Emily's secret compartment. His investigative instincts kicked in. This wasn't a random break-in. This was a message. Someone wanted him to know they had been here, that they were watching. But why leave the USB drive? Was it a taunt? A warning? Before he could complete his thought, his phone rang. An unknown number. The voice on the other end was deep, calculated, deliberately modulated to sound menacing. "Mr. Thomas Harrison," the voice said, each word precise and cold. "I suggest you drop your investigation. For your safety. For your son's safety." Thomas's grip on the phone tightened. "Who is this?" he demanded. A dark chuckle responded. "You know who we are. Argotech Solutions protects its interests. Walk away now, and nothing happens to you or your child." The line went dead. His mind raced. They knew about his son. They knew where he lived. The threat was real, immediate, and terrifyingly personal. Thomas's determination, already strong, now burned with an intensity that would not be extinguished by threats. If anything, this invasion, this anonymous warning, only confirmed what he had suspected. Emily's disappearance was connected to something far more sinister than a simple corporate cover-up. He remembered Emily's note. "They know I know. I must protect my family." Now he understood. This wasn't just about corporate secrets. This was about survival. His next move was clear. He needed someone who could help him navigate this dangerous landscape, someone with experience in investigating corporate corruption. Simon Blake, the investigative journalist Alex had mentioned, was his best hope. As he began gathering the USB drive and what few uncompromised documents he could find, Thomas made a silent promise to Emily. He would uncover the truth, no matter the cost. The ransacked house stood as a testament to the high stakes of his mission. Argotech had drawn first blood, but Thomas was far from defeated. In fact, this invasion had transformed his grief into something more potent, a weaponized resolve to find out what really happened to Emily. Thomas closed the door, the USB drive secure in his pocket, his next move already forming in his mind. Simon Blake would help him turn the tables on Argotech Solutions. The hunt was on. The late afternoon light cast long shadows across Simon Blake's cluttered office, stacks of investigative files creating a fortress around his worn desk. Thomas sat across from him, the weight of anticipation pressing down on his shoulders, the USB drive from Emily's desk clutched tightly in his hand. Simon's fingers flew across his keyboard, his expression growing more intense with each passing moment. "These documents are explosive," he muttered, zooming in on encrypted financial records. "Argotech isn't just involved in minor corporate fraud. This is systematic, multi-layered corruption that goes deep into government and corporate networks." Thomas leaned forward, his voice tight with controlled urgency. "Tell me everything." Simon pulled up a series of interconnected documents, financial trails that seemed to snake through multiple corporations and government departments. Argotech has been manipulating data systems for years. They've been stealing proprietary information, selling corporate secrets, and creating elaborate cover-ups when someone gets too close to exposing them. A photograph caught Thomas's attention. A group of executives standing together at what seemed to be a corporate event. Who are these people? Key players in Argotech's inner circle, Simon explained, highlighting specific individuals. Notice something interesting? Your wife's brother, Gerald, is in several of these photographs. The revelation hit Thomas like a physical blow. Gerald, Emily's own brother, potentially connected to the people who might have been responsible for her disappearance. I need to speak with Gerald, Thomas said, his voice a mixture of determination and controlled anger. The meeting with Gerald was tense. They sat in a small cafe, the ambient noise providing a false sense of privacy. Gerald looked haggard, his hands trembling slightly as he stirred his coffee. Argotech approached me months before Emily's supposed death, Gerald began, his voice barely above a whisper. They wanted inside information. Emily was working on a project that could expose some of their most significant illegal activities. Thomas's grip on his coffee cup tightened. What kind of activities? Gerald's eyes darted around the cafe. Corporate espionage, data manipulation. They were stealing technological innovations from smaller companies, then burying the evidence. Emily discovered documentation that could have brought the entire operation down. So you helped them monitor her? Thomas's voice was razor-sharp. Gerald's shoulders slumped. I didn't know the extent of what they would do. I thought I was protecting her by providing minor information. I never imagined they would... He trailed off, unable to complete the sentence. They what, Gerald? Thomas pressed. They staged her death, Gerald whispered. A completely fabricated car accident with falsified medical reports and bribed officials. They needed her silenced, and a tragic accident was the cleanest way to do it. Simon, who had been quietly recording the conversation, interjected. We have evidence suggesting they've done this before. Argotech has a systematic approach to eliminating potential whistleblowers. The details emerged like pieces of a horrific puzzle. Argotech had meticulously planned Emily's disappearance. They created a death narrative so convincing that her own family would never question it. A medical certificate claimed she died in a violent crash. An unidentified body, strategically positioned and identified through manipulated forensic reports, was buried in her grave. Emily is alive, Gerald said finally, his voice breaking. They're holding her in an isolated location. She gave birth under duress, shortly after her abduction. The baby you found? That was part of her plan to ensure the child's safety. Thomas felt a surge of complex emotions. Relief that Emily might be alive, rage at the orchestrated deception, and an overwhelming protective instinct for his wife and child. Where is she? Thomas demanded. Gerald provided an address, his hands shaking. But be careful. Argotech will do anything to maintain their secrets. As they left the cafe, Thomas realized this was more than a personal quest. This was about exposing a systemic corruption that threatened not just his family, but potentially countless others who had been silenced. The hunt for Emily was about to begin, and Thomas was prepared to burn down everything in his path to bring her home. Thomas stood beside Simon Blake, his body tense with anticipation, while a team of carefully selected operatives prepared for the rescue operation. The past weeks of investigation, emotional turmoil, and relentless pursuit had culminated in this moment. Gerald sat nearby, his hands clasped together, a mixture of guilt and hope etched across his weathered face. I never meant for any of this to happen, he said softly, breaking the tense silence. When Emily first discovered Argotech's illegal activities, she was terrified. She knew the risks of exposing such a powerful corporation. Gerald's eyes filled with a complicated emotion, part regret, part relief. After Emily realized the extent of Argotech's corruption, she knew she couldn't trust anyone completely. She contacted me, knowing I was her last hope. She wanted to ensure that if something happened to her, your child would be safe. Gerald confesses that Emily had begged him to help save their child. With his assistance, she was able to write the note and arrange for the baby's safe placement. Gerald had left the infant at Emily's grave, ensuring Thomas would find him. Simon interjected, spreading out the documents they had collected. The evidence we've gathered is substantial. Corporate espionage, data manipulation, illegal surveillance. Argotech has been operating like a criminal enterprise disguised as a legitimate corporation. The operation was meticulously planned. Intelligence gathered from Emily's USB drive and Gerald's insider information had pinpointed the location where Emily was being held. An isolated farmhouse on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by empty fields and dense woodland, a perfect location for keeping someone hidden. As they prepared to move, Thomas held the baby, their son, close to his chest. The child, with eyes that mirrored Emily's, seemed strangely calm, as if sensing the importance of this moment. "We're ready," the lead operative whispered, checking his communication equipment. The assault was swift and precise. Within minutes, they had secured the farmhouse. Thomas's heart raced, each step bringing him closer to potentially discovering the truth about Emily. And then, in a small, sparsely furnished room at the back of the house, they found her. Emily looked fragile, her once vibrant complexion now pale and marked by her ordeal. But her eyes, those same blue-green eyes Thomas had fallen in love with years ago, burned with an inner strength that had kept her alive. "Thomas," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The room seemed to dissolve around them. The operatives, Simon, Gerald, they all faded into the background. There was only Thomas, Emily, and their son. Thomas approached her slowly, tears streaming down his face. The baby reached out, making a soft cooing sound that seemed to bridge the months of separation. "They tried to silence me," Emily said weakly, "but I couldn't let them destroy everything we had worked for." Over the next hours, Emily revealed the full extent of Argotech's plan. They had discovered her investigation into their illegal data manipulation and corporate fraud. To protect their operations, they had staged her death, keeping her isolated and monitored, believing they could prevent her from exposing their crimes. Simon and the operatives began collecting evidence: documents, digital records, communication logs, everything that would help dismantle Argotech's criminal enterprise. As authorities were notified and an investigation launched, Thomas, Emily, and their son remained together, a testament to love's resilience and the power of truth. "We survived," Emily whispered, holding Thomas's hand. "We're together now." The farmhouse, once a symbol of their separation, now represented their reunion and the beginning of their fight for justice. Outside, the first rays of true sunlight broke through the morning mist, symbolizing hope, renewal, and the promise of a future they would face together. Do you like this touching and surprising story? If so, we invite you to leave us a comment expressing your opinion. If you want to continue enjoying inspiring stories like this one, subscribe to our channel or check out the other videos shown at the bottom of the screen. Thank you for your cooperation.